Welcome to the Gird Up Podcast. My name is Charlie Ungemach. We have a guest today that I'm real excited about. But before we get to that, we'll remind you that this show is funded by viewers just like you. So if you'd like to see more content like you're seeing now created in the future, please consider going down in the show notes below. Click on the link to the website. And once you get there, you can either click on the Make a Donation tab or on the Buy us a Cup of Coffee button. And you can make a $5 donation there. That $5 donation is the price of a cup of coffee, but with that $5, you can help fund the work that we're doing here at Gird Up, creating content for Christians and preparing God's people for whatever lies ahead. Please consider it. Let's get started. My guest today is a man who's very important to me, whom I love very dearly, my grandfather, Mr. Robert A. Schmidt.
Hi, Charlie.
Hey. So, I've talked about you a little bit on the podcast a few times because everybody likes to talk about their grandpas. But let's start with just an introduction. Who are you? What do you do? So forth.
Well, I'm Bob Schmidt. I live in Salem, or next to Salem. I'm theoretically retired from being a farm machinery dealer. However, I have a hard time staying home, so I go back and help out where I can. And then I live next to Silver Lake, so I try to go fishing as much as I can, and nice and close to most of the kids, and so I get to see them very often, which is real good.
Yeah. Now you work with your son every day, my Uncle David. What's it like working together with family? And you worked with Grandma for many, many years as well. Right.
Well, I worked with my dad. I started with my dad when I was in grade school. We used to come home and sweep the floor after we came home from school. But I now worked with my dad full-time from the time I was about 18 years old. And we kind of switched places as time went on, to the point where I was the principal. And then David and I did the same thing. We switched places during that period of time till the time he became principal. And at that time, I retired, theoretically, and left the family business up to him. We actually joined another firm, which is the way that business trends are going nowadays. So at that time, we had, as a family, been in business for 90 years. Now it's been 100 years since we're in the same town. But David and I always got along real well. My dad and I always got along. The agreement that I had with David was that part of it anyway was that we had to agree that we weren't always going to agree, and that was okay. And also that he had to take his day off. I guess that's one thing I didn't learn until too late. So I go in now, and I don't go as early in the morning and stay as late at night as I used to, but and do a little work, take care of things that maybe wouldn't get done, do a little bit of selling, and just enjoy talking with a lot of people. I guess I'm the social director.
It's not a bad thing to be. Not a bad thing to be at all, especially at a company like the one you've got there, where you have a lot of generational customers and things like that. Those relationships can, I don't know, it seems to me like those relationships tend to go, as you mentioned, the trend in business is to consolidate, right?
Right.
It seems to me like a lot of those relationships start to disappear the more you consolidate. So to have somebody around to keep doing the social thing and having those conversations, remembers people from one year to the next and so forth, I'm sure it's a valuable thing.
Yeah, it is. And we're fortunate that we consolidated with another family, so we have kind of the same thing. And it is important. We have several customers who are third and fourth generation customers. So lots of times we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah. When you're building relationships with customers, is it just a familiarity thing, like they keep coming in and eventually get to know each other? Is that something you're intentional about? How does that go?
Well, we get to know the customer, and we get to know what he needs. Sometimes what he thinks he needs, he doesn't really need, and we, I guess, are not bashful and saying you're going to get in trouble if you do that. And over a period of time, we treat everybody as we'd like to be treated, and we're honest. I learned a long time ago there's no gray. It's either white or black. And we don't have any qualms about that. And I think that a relationship builds because our customers begin to understand that too, that whatever we say we're going to do, we're going to do.
Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong, but what I kind of hear you saying is that there are times where you could upsell, or maybe even the customer is kind of upselling himself, and you warn him against that. Is that what I hear you saying?
If we have a situation where the customer sees some piece of machinery that he really likes, and we know what his operation is like, and we don't think it'll work, we're willing to tell him we don't think that's going to work for you.
Now, I can imagine that would cost you some sales at some point, right? Like you could generally, if somebody, let me think how to say this. Generally, in a situation like that, you're not going to sell them usually a bigger, more powerful piece of equipment. Is I guess what I'm thinking, right?
You may not sell him anything that day, but and sometimes he'll go buy that piece that he was so enthused about from somebody else, and then come back later and say, "Well, I guess I want to trade it in." Yeah, because it didn't work.
Does that happen a lot?
No, not very often, but it does happen.
Yeah.
But it goes back to you just have to be honest with the guy, and if you don't think it's going to work, you got to tell him.
Have you ever? You mentioned that maybe some people go buy equipment in other places. Have you ever just lost the customer's business because you wouldn't do what they wanted?
Yeah. But we never lost the customer over that.
Okay.
Might have lost that day, but
yeah, right. Well, what do you mean by that? So you said might have lost that day, but not in the long run.
Well, he might not have purchased the machine that he was excited about from us. He bought it from somebody else. But we haven't made an enemy, and we have preserved our relationship of honesty.
Yeah. Is that something that obviously then you're instilling that also in the people that work for you? Right?
Yes, absolutely.
How does that go? Is that generally, do the people that work for you generally get on board with that pretty quickly? Do you think?
I think the fact that we do that, we operate based on an example that way. And they can see what we do and what we don't do. And they know whether we're going to cheat somebody or whether we're not. And it rubs off on them real quick. And frankly, we hire rather slowly. We're pretty particular about how we hire, or we have been, and the new company does also.
Yeah. So what are you looking for then? In that slow hiring process means you're being very particular about who you're hiring. What are you looking for in somebody when you're doing that hiring that?
Well, obviously you're looking for skill if you can find it in the particular area that you want. But I think we're looking for ethics and personality and honesty. I think ethics and honesty are the two things that we are really after. You can teach them about machinery, but they have to have the background that we're looking for, which is ethics and honesty.
How do you know that what do you see in somebody that says, I think they've got what I'm looking for? Like, how do you know? Ethics and honesty is something that kind of will display itself through a relationship, right? It's not something you can necessarily know right off the bat. So how do you know, or hopefully know, that that's what you're getting from somebody before you hire them?
I don't know. You just have a feeling. We usually have long conversations, or I don't do this anymore, but David does it, and the conversations get pretty long, and just in the conversation you get a feeling for, are we going to be able to work together or aren't we? And we interview, and again, when I say we, even though I'm retired, it's still we. Yeah, but we're looking for people all the time, and we interview a whole lot more people than we ever hire. But as far as what's the criterion, 1, 2, 3, these are the three criteria. No, I can't tell you what that is. It's a feeling.
Yeah. Now you've worked with a lot of people over the years. You've hired a lot of people over the years. You've retained a lot of people for a lot of years. What is it that keeps good employees around? Because you've had some good ones. I had the privilege and the opportunity of working for you quite a bit in high school and a little bit in college and things like that. And they're good employees, good men you've had around for many, many years. What is it that keeps employees like that around?
I think respect and listening to what they have to say, because if I'm sitting up in the office and they're out and back doing the work, they know more about it than I do. I think that's the two things that keep them in. Obviously, you got to treat them right as far as compensation and benefits and so on, but that doesn't hold them if they don't think that they're respected. I think that's what it amounts to. But right now we have 2 people working for us that have been there ever since they got out of high school. I can remember them both coming in with their dads, and their dads saying, have you got anything these kids can do? So basically we hired them and handed them a broom, and they came up from there.
That's awesome. So you've hired a lot of young men over a long number of years. Is it true that kids are different these days, do you think? Or what maybe is different, or what's maybe the same about young people, particularly the young men that you're hiring now or that you see working for the company now versus years ago?
I don't think there's as much difference as what the common feeling out in the world thinks there is, because we've got some young folks that are really fit the mold. We have a fence around the store, and if I'm the last one out, there'll be a young fellow behind me, and he'll wait for me, and then he'll close the gate. Some young fellows that come in the morning and open up because they're there long before the starting time. I think they're out there, but the ones we hear about are the ones that aren't willing to do those kind of things and aren't willing to respect the opportunity that they have, I guess. But I think there's good kids out there, and I think some of them don't understand that the opportunities are there, and maybe don't understand that the opportunity doesn't show itself in the first few months of your job. It might take a few years before you become that respected employee that everybody knows. And we have customers that come in and ask for a particular person. That's pretty good, and we have that.
So were there more young people like that in the past, do you think?
I think so.
Why? What do you think has changed? That there's fewer, and we don't have numbers in front of us, like there's no way to quantify this, right? But what do you think has changed? Why is it different now than it was in the past?
Well, it seems like the people that are not the kind that we're looking for, are not the kind of people that we would like to see, not only for our business, but just walking around, their family life is different. Moms have always worked, but the families did things together, and they don't do that as much in some of these cases. And I think that has a big part of it. I also think that the social opportunities, and when I say social opportunities, I mean the things that the kids can do nowadays all the way from sports and computer games and all of those kind of things that have taken their attention away from doing things together with either family or friends. I'm so old now that I'll go back and say I remember when. But, we used to go down with the neighbor kids to the lake in Salem and build a fire on the ice and ice skate. A group of guys, or girls too. That's what we did. You don't see that now. I think that's maybe what it amounts to. And the same thing goes, you don't see them in church. They just aren't there. The interesting part of it is that a lot of the people that we respect, and I say we, older people, respect, have got some of the same guidelines within them that we had. I don't know anything other than that, and they need to be taught. And I say too many kids don't know the word no. They don't understand that not everything is available to them right now. They also may not understand that a lot of things are available to them, but maybe not right now.
Yeah. Education, one of the catchphrases or buzzwords or whatever is this idea of most education is caught, not taught, especially when you're talking about moral education and things like that. It's caught, not taught. And even when it isn't necessarily, the person in authority is telling you no, even just to be around, as a young person, being around adults or people that you have respect for who also have self-control and also have integrity and so forth. Like a lot of that is caught too. And then even from friends, right? If your friend, how many people are there who can't really tell you why their hobbies are their hobbies? And that's not a bad thing. It's something that they caught along the way, right? How many, this is maybe a trite example, but how many hunters are there that never took a hunting lesson and never really thought about not hunting or whatever it might be, because it's just part of who they are, right? They weren't necessarily even taught any of these things. They caught them from the people around them. The same thing is true of churches, right? If you have churches that are, this is opening up a whole different can of worms too, but if you have churches that are entirely old women, what's a young man going to catch?
Right.
Right? He might be taught all the right things, but what's he going to catch? Church is a place for old women, right? I think it can go the other direction too, of like when the first couple places that you're employed are not doing things ethically, that gets caught too. And your way of doing things, or even high school football coaches, all those types of things, right? People have influence on us, and the people around us have Here's a question for you. I think, so one of my favorite concepts, and I think it's true, is the idea that you're most like the 5 people you spend the most time with, and that 5 number is flexible, right? But whatever people you spend the most time with. It's my theory that the people who, when I say young people, I include my generation. There's way too many human beings under the age of maybe 35 or 40 who most of the time they spend with people is not time in a room sitting across the table and having a conversation or doing things together. It's through screens. And a lot of times the people who you spend the most time with or who you're most like aren't people that actually know you at all. It's somebody on the other side of a TV screen. Whether it's your favorite TV characters, your favorite influencers, maybe it's even people you game with or whatever, but it's not people that you have a real relationship with. And I think we've lost something really important. Maybe not lost entirely, but I think we lose something really important when we don't have those kinds of friendships personally. And I see it in my own life. It's hard to be 30 years old and have mature male friendships. It's tough. At least in my shoes, it's tough. I have some guys that I really love who I do my best to keep up with and so forth. And I'm surrounded every day with seminarians. But again, most of them are 8 to 10 years younger than me. So then there is a gap, and it is different. And I love the brotherhood at the seminary and so forth. But it's not the same as having old friends. I don't think there's a lot of people that don't have old friends. And you can't make new old friends.
No. But I think you're on the right track. It is, I guess I would say, disgusting to me when I walk into a restaurant and sit down and then look around and here's a family there, and the whole family, mother and dad included, are all looking at their screens instead of talking to each other. And that's maybe one of the things that is leading to what we understand as people that aren't, I don't know what you would call it.
Socialized, maybe.
Socialized. But that to me is disgusting. The other thing is that I think that your peers have a role in creating a demand of you. If you don't want to have friends that cuss and swear, you better not cuss and swear yourself. One thing that bothers me too is that it's apparent that somewhere along the line, either the educators or the parents or the people that are influencing so many people nowadays don't speak correct English. We were brought up to know that you said that ain't wasn't a word. And nowadays you hear all of this kind of stuff. And there was a TV ad I saw the other day where this lady said they had some work done and they never seen the bill. Well, I don't think that's in any English book. But somewhere along the line, there had to be somebody that would have corrected that long before this lady ever said that on TV. Somebody needed to correct that when she was 9 years old. And I think that is part of what our problem is in some of the people that we would not recognize as people we'd like to have as our friends.
Yeah.
And you brought up another point, and that is that it's hard for you at 30 years old to have meaningful friends of your own age. Well, I'm 87, and it's hard for me to have friends of my own age because, frankly, a lot of them have passed on. I still do have some. I called a friend of mine in Texas last night just to visit because it was the birthday, and I wanted to wish her birthday. And but what I find is that if I'm willing to intermingle with the younger people, I get along fine. But I kind of have to pay attention to what their interests are too, I guess.
Yeah. I told you on the phone when we were setting this up, I think it's no secret that our society has definitely started to place less value on the elderly. And I wouldn't put you in the category of elderly. I think that's more of a state of mind or a condition of body than it is an age. I would never dare. I think it's more of a condition of age and no, not a condition of age, a condition of mind and body more than it is anything else. But like, it's also true just in general of like the older people among us. For some reason, we don't seem to value. I think we should value the older generations across the board, whether it's our parents, grandparents, whatever. I think we should value them a lot more than we do. And maybe that's because I've experienced the loss of several grandparents that were very close to me and very important. I mean, my grandpa Ungemach, we went to their house after school and things, and they lived 5 minutes from Shoreland, and yeah, just kind of like they were always there, right? Same with you guys, just always around, which is a wonderful blessing to have. And I know not every family has parents and grandparents that were that. Grandpa Matthias even, he's right across the lake, right? And we it was again a blessing that both he and Graham were. I mean, he wasn't as lucid at the end, right? But like very much kept his mind to a very, very old age too, which
It
like
takes a
it
little,
helps.
excuse me, it takes a little effort on both ends, though.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
suppose.
and I don't know, effort is, yeah, I guess you call it effort. I can remember when you and I go fishing. Well, it was a great pleasure for me, and I hope it was a great pleasure for you. And here we're a couple generations apart. And, you could have just said, I don't know, well, that old guy. But it takes a little effort.
Yeah, yeah,
And somehow or another, it seems like the willingness to put in the effort has been diminished, um, which goes to impatience, I guess, and so on. I think keeping busy is another thing. I could sit home and watch TV, but I don't want to do that. I just I'm thankful for what I have and thankful for the friends that I've always had, and I seem to get along with the people no matter what their age is. I hope I do anyway, or at least. But I do sense a feeling among some of the people that, oh, you probably can't do that anymore. And I guess what that does is just kind of drives me, go do it.
watch me.
Watch me. Get out of
Yeah,
the way.
I actually came across. I don't remember where it might have even been like in our studies, like maybe in like a sociology class or something like that. I think it was like a sociology class, where there was a study done where they took a whole it was like I think it was 25 people over the age of 70, and they are two groups of, so it was a total of 50. One group of people over the age of 70, they went to like a kids summer camp, and they treated them like kids. So they got them up out of bed in the morning and made them play games, and they did arts and crafts, and they sang songs, and they had I think it was even like Bible studies and book clubs and all that kind of stuff. And they treated them like they were 10 years old. And then the other group, they took them to essentially like a retirement home, a retirement community, and they treated them like they were elderly. And the people in that they took to the retirement community um, developed more health issues. They like displayed like even greater decline in like cognitive and physical measurables and things like that than they had before. Basically, the old people kept getting older when you treated them like they were old people. The people that went to the summer, it was a 3-month study, if I remember right. People that went to the summer camp, at the end of the 3 months, to a man, like to a person, were healthier, felt younger, like their health was improving, their like mental and physical health was improving, like across the board, they were getting younger. And the purpose of looking at the study was the idea of you how you behave determines a lot of things. So if you quote unquote act old, then you'll get older. If you quote unquote act young, then you'll get younger. And that I'm even starting to notice that now. Like if I'm not active for a couple of weeks, man, I start to feel, if I'm just sitting in a chair all the time and don't do anything athletic and don't work out and don't move at all, I start to feel like an old man. And the flip side is also true. Like when you get some momentum, things just keep getting better and better and better.
Oh, yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
It's awful easy to sit here and watch TV. But and along the lines that we're talking about right now, as far as meeting other people of other ages and so on, I think you got to take people as they are too. Dealing with people all my life. Um, I shouldn't say dealing with people, but interacting with people. We have run into everybody, and what I've learned over a lot of years is you can make friends with anybody. You can talk to anybody. You may not agree with everything they do, but they're not going to agree with everything you do either. But you kind of got to take them for what they are, and And if it's just something that, this guy that cusses and swears all the time, if you can't handle that, well, then maybe better go on to the next person. But it's, I think you got to do some of that and not try to hold everybody to a standard that is not practical.
Yeah. You even mentioned that a little bit working with my Uncle Dave, with your son, right? You said you agree that you're not always going to agree all the time. I think that's going to be true of any relationship, right? Is you're not always going to see eye to eye all the time. They're not always going to do what you want them to do. Not always going to do what you would hope they would do. And you're not always going to do what you maybe even ought to do either, right? So understanding that is probably an important thing.
Yeah, well, like with David and I, we haven't always agreed. And we've told each other what we didn't agree about, but we come to some conclusion. And as you get old, like I am, I think you have to realize that as far as in a business setting anyway, I'm not the boss anymore, and I can express my opinion. But if the company makes a different decision, that's fine. I'll work with it. And you have to be willing to work with it as long as it's honest and upright, and so on. But it's just, I was going to say roll with the punches, but maybe that's part of it.
Yeah. Now you mentioned a couple different times family and role. Family has played. I mean, you've played a very significant role in your life, right? Working with family. Well, actually, let's talk about this first. One of the things you mentioned in young people that you're looking for is like the family that they come from, right? And you've talked a little bit about how much you value church and your faith, but I would like to talk even more about that. You've remained remarkably consistent over a lifetime of making that something very valuable to you. I mean, like you at one point switched congregations so your kids could go to a school, like a Lutheran school. You've remained, like you said, remarkably faithful to your congregation. I mean, even now you're doing house visits for prospective members and things like that. That's not the trend in society. So what's kept you in church? And what's kept you in church and why?
Well, that's a tough question because you could come up with a stock answer for that, but I guess I feel that the good Lord has got control, and everything that happens because He does have control. You don't know it at the time. You don't think about it. I can think of instances when I think back where I was protected. I came out of a pretty bad car accident, without a scratch. And I made that comment to somebody much wiser than I am. And this person said, well, maybe the good Lord's got something else for you to do. To me, that's the thing that keeps me, because I know that I have somebody taking care of me. When I met your grandma, we had lived a mile apart for 20 years, and I didn't know her because they went to one church, we went to another. They went to one school, and I went to a different one, and so on. And we were working at the fair on an exhibit, and my dad said to me one day, he said, there's this real nice looking girl up there in the office. He says, you ought to go get acquainted. So I did. And but it took me 4 years to make up my mind, I guess, that I should read the message. I probably wasn't very thoughtful because we went out together for 4 years off and on. I would ask her for some dates, and we'd go out. Seemed like in the summertime, and then I'd go do something in the winter, and wouldn't see her for all winter. And then I went back, kept coming back, but she was always there. I think that was planned. One year we had some very nice times together, and I went off to Australia for 6 months and never told her what I told her where I was going, but never told her why or what, and never wrote to her or anything. And like I said, she should have thrown me out. But I think that the good Lord had a hand in that, and it was great.
What, when you finally did pull the trigger, if you will, what was it that you were dating on and off for 4 years? What was it that finally, I don't know, convinced you maybe, or pushed you over the edge, said, I ought to marry this girl?
Well, we got along very well. And I dated several girls between the time I was 18 and 25. And even during the time when we went out off and on, I still had some dates with some other girls, nice girls. And I had a couple of aunts that were bound and determined they were going to find somebody for me. And my mother thought I was never going to find a girl. But we went along. We did a lot of things. And I guess it was, we both went to Lutheran church. We had some of the same standards. And I was in love. And I guess I didn't know it until it took me that long.
She ever give you any guff about waiting that long?
No, she didn't. No, she didn't. Your grandmother was quite a girl. She never gave me a hard time about it. And we had 57 years together, and we also didn't always agree, but we never had a fight.
Yeah. You guys also worked together.
We worked together.
What's that like?
Well, she didn't really, well, David and Amy were younger, like below about 5th grade, 4th grade. She didn't work very much at all. She would come to the shop and help us with some bookkeeping if we needed some help. But then we lost the bookkeeper one day, and I called her and asked her if she'd come in and help or talk to her about it, and she said she would, and she came in.
And she was trained as a librarian, right?
She went to the University of Whitewater on a part-time basis to get as a librarian because she loved books and loved the library.
Mm-hmm.
And she also was a self-taught accountant. If she'd have been working for somebody else, she'd have been called the controller.
Okay.
Her experience started when she worked for Wilmot High School, for the principal of Wilmot High School, as the secretary to the school and the board of directors of the school district. And it was a wonderful thing to have her working in the office because she knew the books. She knew how to write, to do books, and she was extremely particular, as you well know. And so she did her thing and I did mine, basically. And we did have a rule, that is, when we got home, we didn't talk about the shop. And it just worked out real well. It was easy for me because I didn't have to go over the books to check and see if they were right. I knew they were right. And, up until the time she came there, somebody handed me a handful of checks to sign. I would go over every one. Well, I still checked them over to see what we were buying, but I didn't have to. If she handed me a check and said, "Here, sign this check," I signed the check because I knew it was right. But we got along real well. It was sometimes probably not the greatest thing in the world because we didn't spend enough time together. And we didn't always agree about the management of the store either. But we just had a good relationship with it, and she did a wonderful job. But that's one of the things that But I told David that he should, we didn't always agree, that we wouldn't always agree. Also, part of that agreement was that he had learned to take his days off because I didn't do that. And I think Lois and I should have taken more days off. We went through some pretty tough times, and so we didn't hire enough people at one time. And
You saying the company went through some pretty tough times?
yeah, no, our marriage never went through any tough times. We had situations that we handled, but never had any difficult times with the marriage at all. No. But we had some trying times with the economy and so on with the business a time or two, and so you end up working harder instead of smarter, I guess. And we should have spent more time together.
What does that look like? Like if you're, I guess, I'm thinking, like, well, small business ownership is on the rise again in our country, which is a wonderful thing for all kinds of reasons. And I know for a fact that I can think of at least a dozen young enough to still have kids at home, men who listen to this podcast regularly, who are small business owners. What advice would you give on, I guess, maybe managing those family relationships and managing like your home life and things alongside a company that kind of depends on you to some degree, at least, to be successful? Can you do both things well?
Yeah. I think communication is the one big thing. And I think an understanding going in of what each member of the family's responsibilities are in the business, and then keeping clean lines between the responsibilities. And there has to be one person who is I won't say leader, but yeah, maybe leader is the right word. The final buck stops here person, which is probably the most difficult part of a family relationship, because you don't do some things that you should do that are good for the business in order to preserve the family. And you got to take your days off. And I guess one of my weaknesses is I'd give somebody a job and then I wanted to make sure they were doing the job. It took a long time for me to learn that what you need to do is give them a job and the expectations, and then let them go. That was difficult for me. As far as the family goes, I think the going in is the greatest challenge. The going in, when you sit down and say, okay, we're going to go into business together. Now is the time to figure out how are we going to do this?
Is that something, so for you personally, was that a conversation that you had before you got married, or is that a conversation you had when, like particularly with grandma? Is that a conversation you had before you got married? Is that a conversation you had before you took over the shop from great grandpa? Like how'd that go?
Well, I don't suppose I really had that conversation with my dad. David and I had a conversation to a degree, but in both our cases, when I took over from my dad and when Dave took over from me, we kind of did it on a 10-year basis, and it just happened. As far as with Louise, going into the marriage, I said, I don't want you to work. Because I was very strong, in fact, I still am strong on that the mom needs to be the mom. But when it came time for her to join the company as a person and an officer of the corporation, we sat down and talked about what she was going to do and I was going to do, and we agreed on it. And we didn't have an agreement; we just agreed. And once in a while, she had to remind me, but your grandmother was quite a yell.
She was indeed. You talked about time together. What do you mean by that? So not just taking days off, but then when you have time together, that you're together.
Well, instead of me going fishing and she going and the family going to the ball game, we all go to the ball game or we all go fishing. Now, all is a big word, but that's what I mean. Do things together. Going back to people that we hire, a lot of the people that we hire are very active in the county fairs. And you can see it there, where the families go together to the fair to work with the cattle, to work with the forage projects and so on. The kids are there showing the projects or their cattle or their sowing or whatever it is, and the parents are there as the leaders. That's doing it together. That's what I think, you know.
Yeah.
You don't go on separate vacations, you go together. I never learned how to golf because I wasn't going to go and spend 4 or 5 hours on a day off to go golfing and not be at home or whatever we wanted.
You once told me a story about your doctor and your blood pressure. You remember that? You know what I'm talking about?
I'm not sure.
You said at some point you had high blood pressure. You went to the doctor, and you asked if there's a medication you should go on or something like that. What did he tell you?
First of all, I told him you had to have high blood pressure to have ambition. And I said, you know, I go home after work and before supper I have a little bit of a drink and I feel much better. Yeah, he said, my advice is you go home and have that drink before supper. He said, but make sure it's good stuff. Don't drink the rot gut. And he said, but stop there. And so for, I don't know, 50, 60 years, I have a shot of a good drink every night before supper, and my blood pressure is still too high.
What's the good stuff?
What's the good stuff?
Yeah.
Well, I think as far as brands go, I jump from one to another, but I think his explanation of it is the best. Don't drink the bottom shelf rot gut stuff. You know.
It's not pleasant anyway.
No.
It's not pleasant anyway.
And the other part of the advice was to stop there, you know.
Yeah.
And my family, my dad would have a beer or a drink, and we'd have wine at Christmas and Thanksgiving. And even as young kids, we had part of a glass of wine, you know, long before we were old enough. But I think maybe that's why we didn't have the desire to soak it up when we got older.
Yeah. And you, I mean, most of your, or even now, you're only maybe 10 minutes from the shop, right? And for most of your life, it was even less than that, right? It was literally right down the corner. So you don't have a commute or like a buffer of any kind between work and home, right? You could like just show up and still, like, your mind's still at work, right? And I think maybe that's the secret, right? Is the ability to, like, find a moment to shift gears and change, like, go from work you to home you, if that makes sense. And
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, just to have a clear delineation of, like, I'm shifting into home mode now, right? That I've never been married and don't have a family yet, but even just I'm with teaching. When there were times, especially at the schools I was at, and the situations that we were in as a school, there were times where there just wasn't any way around it. You're going to work 70, 80 hours during a week. And that isn't sustainable long term. But it's even less so when it's like when you still go home after that and grade papers and work on lesson plans and so forth. So it became really important to me really quickly to not bring work home, even though I didn't have a family. It just for my own sanity and for my own longevity. I I just can't bring this stuff home with me. I know that there's other teachers that have, and I guess you got to do what works for you. But I don't think that can be overstated. The importance of leaving work at work and making sure you're present where you are. Be where your feet are, right?
Yep. There was a time when, like I said, we had some difficult financial times during the 80s were really bad for as far as the farm economy was and our business was. And, we had a couple other stores we actually closed because we just couldn't sustain them. And that saved us. But, I found myself doing work during the day and bringing paperwork home at night. We did advertising at night after supper and so on. And that wasn't good either because then I didn't spend time with my kids. But I remember I read a book by Lee Iacocca, and he worked 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, according to the book. And he had the theory that and I've heard this other places, but the theory is that the work will expand to take up the time allotted. And that's so right.
Say more about that. The work will expand to take up the time allotted. What do you mean by that?
If you have a project and you put yourself into that project and you say, it's going to take me 3 hours, and then I'm got to have it done by then. Deadline. Got to hand this paper in by such and such a time. At the end of the 3 hours, you got it done. If you start on that project and you don't have a deadline, it'll take you 5.
And equality, sometimes it'll be better, but it will not always. Yeah, not always. One of our professors within the last 2 weeks, and obviously studying to be pastors, right? So one of our professors asked the class, what's the difference between a good sermon and a great sermon? And he let everybody answer, and he goes, the real answer to that question is 5 hours, but you're almost never going to get the 5 hours, so be okay with a good sermon and not a great one. It's like, that's probably true, but that sounds a lot like what you're saying. So set boundaries, maybe time boundaries, I guess, for tasks, and they'll get done. All right. You're also a big Dale Carnegie guy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So perhaps the most read, besides the Bible and the Book of Concord, perhaps the most read book on my shelf, or not even the Book of Concord, really just the Catechism, the Bible and the Catechism. Besides those two, I think the most read book on my shelf is Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I did not come to that book through you. It was a part of a class that I took in college, and I'm thankful for it. But you, how did you come across Dale Carnegie?
Dad had taken the Dale Carnegie course, and after a while, I thought, well, I'll do it too. And it was a very good thing to take, not only because you could learn to stand up and speak in front of people, which I didn't do an awful lot of, but I spoke in front of a lot of people. And I think that the theory behind knowing what you're doing, saying what you know, and the old cliche of stand up, speak up, shut up, has always been in my mind. I think we often tend to talk too much. I do, but I enjoyed that class, and I still have that little book in the drawer in the laundry room, and it's pretty wore out.
Yeah, I don't know of anybody who's. I know people that have read it that read it once and we're done with it, but I can't think of anybody that read it and said, "Wow, what a waste of time."
Well, it really helped me a lot. Well, I was on a couple boards of directors, and where you have to speak to people who are much smarter than you are, and then when I was in Australia, I did a lot of speaking, and of course it helped there. But no, I think that the fact of knowing what you're speaking, don't be afraid of the people sitting in front of you, and when you're done, sit down.
Yeah, You mentioned Australia a couple of times. Why did you go to, and you mentioned as a pretty young man, you went to Australia. Why did you go to Australia? What were you doing there?
Well, as a kid, I was very active in 4-H. I had projects in 4-H, and my mother and dad were both leaders, and we did those things together. Anyway, 4-H at the time sponsored a project of understanding with other countries, and it was called IFE, International Farm Youth Exchange. And when I was 21 years old, I had applied once before, and then I applied and didn't get it, but then I applied again, and I got chosen to be an IFE to Australia. And the theme of it was peace through understanding. In other words, understanding what the other people's point of view is and how they live and so on. And by understanding, even though you don't do it the same, you can get along. And so, yeah, I went to Australia. When I was 21 years old, I was there for about a little over 5 months. I lived with several farm families as a member of the family. In other words, if they were milking cows, I would help, although they didn't let me milk cows. But and I sheared a couple sheep, and I would try to live right in with the family. Some of them I didn't stay with very long, maybe a night or two, and some of them I stayed for a couple of weeks. And the experience of staying with somebody like that for a couple of weeks was really an experience. And so I was the Yank, and at the time, in the early 60s, Australian people had the American image in their mind from American TV because they had all the American TV programs over there. They would want to know where I lived, where in the United States. And I said, well, I'm 60 miles north of Chicago. So they wanted to know if I had to carry a gun. One of my host fathers, who was actually a member of the Australian legislature, asked me if we ate real food or if we just ate pills.
Wow.
And so I was America to them. And after staying with them for a couple of days, I really kind of tried to melt in with the families and got some real friendships. I have 2 families yet that I am friends with that I stayed with them when I was in Australia. But I lived with farm families in South Australia and Tasmania. I did everything from, like I said, shear sheep and sew up grain bags and pick cherries and raspberries in Tasmania, but I got to know people real well. I always remember one lady that I came to their place and their son was about my age and belonged to the junior farmer program over there, which was equal to the 4-H and FFA program here. And I walked in the back door and kind of introduced myself because you just walked in and said who you were. They know who you were.
Right.
And she said to me, we're not going to change just because you're here. We're going to live just the way we live now. And if you don't like it, that's okay. It was one of the best places I stayed. They also, the same family, had just moved into a new house. And most places over there at that time didn't have screens on the windows. But this place did have screens on the windows. But in the room I was staying, the screen was ajar. It wasn't tight. So there were bugs in the room at night. So the next morning I was outside and I went around to the side of the house where that window was, and I was kind of setting that screen in the window. And she come around and looked out there. She said, what are you doing? Well, I said there was bugs in my room last night and the screen is ajar. I was just adjusting it. She said, I'll have you know there's no bugs in my house. And then she thought again and she said, No, there's no insects in my house. And this was one of the things that created the, understanding between people. I ran into that a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what determined how long you were going to stay with a family? Like, if things were going well, you stuck around, or was that predetermined for you?
It was predetermined. I was in two different states, Tasmania and South Australia. And I would go to South Australia, for example, was my first place. And you would be assigned to a club, a junior farmer club. And then that club would decide where you were going to stay. A couple of places I just stayed overnight one night. Of several places, I stayed for a week or 10 days. And that's where I've really accomplished what the program is about. Because you got understanding each other. And so I stayed in 26 different families, but about probably 8 of them for periods of time. Otherwise, it was 2 or 3 days or something like that.
Were there any that were just miserable that you couldn't wait to leave?
No.
No?
No.
Good.
Not a one.
Good.
Not a one. I could tell you stories for a week.
Any stories that rise to the top? Like, these are top tier, my favorite stories.
Oh, yeah, we went kangaroo hunting one night. And kangaroos are a pest. And the reason they are a pest is that Australia raises a lot of sheep. I don't remember if I know the statistic anymore, but something like 8 or 10 sheep to every person in Australia.
Wow.
And the kangaroos eat the same thing the sheep do. And there isn't that much out there in the outback growing because it's so dry. And so they shoot kangaroos. They're hunted. And so one night they decided that I should go kangaroo hunting. And the way they did it was they had what they call utes for vehicles, which is a utility vehicle or like a pickup truck. And this ute had a cage around the back that was padded on top with old rags or something. And the driver and me in the cab part of the time and me on the out and back part of the time. And it was 3 guys that night anyway in the back of the truck, 2 with high-powered rifles and 1 with a huge spotlight. And you go down the country roads in the outback, or, we really weren't in the way outback, but there was no fences and so on. And the roads were pretty much, they graded them out and you drove on them. And so you're driving down the road and they would be shining this spotlight back and forth in the brush. And when the guy would see a kangaroo, and mostly what you would see is his eyes.
Kind of like raccoons?
Yep. Then he'd pound on the roof of the cab of the truck and shine the light on the kangaroo. And the driver then would follow the beam of light because he couldn't see the kangaroo through the stumps and stones and knock trees down. I mean, this truck was not in very good shape, and when it got to the point where the kangaroo knew he was getting close to something, then the kangaroo always stopped, and then they'd shoot him. So we came home with 3 or 4 kangaroos that night, and I said, "No, what are you going to do with them?" "Oh, we feed them to the dogs." Because the farmers all had sheepdogs.
Oh, yeah.
They were not pets.
Yeah.
They made that very clear. They're not pets. And so they would feed the kangaroo meat to the dogs.
What difference so you said they made it clear they're not pets. What difference does that make, you think?
Well, they're highly trained, and the Australian sheepdog somehow has it bred into them. But I'm not much of a dog person, so I would say it probably means that the dog does not the dog has respect for you rather than love for you.
Gotcha.
But
Yeah.
these guys would take, one day one of the farms that I was on had to move a flock of sheep. This was 5,000 sheep. I mean, it was a big, big bunch. And it's a mob over there. That's a mob of sheep. And we drove them down from one paddock to another and down one of these country roads. And 3 dogs did the work. 3 dogs and a couple guys. At that time, they didn't use motorcycles. Now they use motorcycles and utes, and ATVs. But and we just followed behind. The dogs did the work.
I would love to have, like one of my favorite pictures. Again, going back, I'm studying to be a pastor, so I can't help it. But one of my favorite images of a pastor is as the sheepdog. You're not the good shepherd, and you're not one of the sheep. You're the sheepdog. I always thought it'd be cool. I always thought it'd be cool to have a picture of a sheepdog hanging in my office somewhere, and not explain to anybody what it was unless they asked. Just, why is there a sheepdog hanging on a wall? I just thought that'd be cool. What? Well, so this is the late '60s. You didn't fly over there, did you?
No. We took a boat. Pacific and Orient steam navigation company, Arcadia. It was
Arcadia is the name of the ship.
Yeah. And we sailed from San Francisco to Sydney, Australia. Took us 3 weeks, and stopped in Hawaii, Fiji, New Zealand. And the size of the boat, I can't remember as far as length and width and so on, but nowadays they talk about thousands of people on the boat. I think there was 800 passengers on this boat.
Okay. So big, but not huge.
Yeah. Alongside of the boats of today, or ships of today, it would be nothing. It was great. He said you had nothing to do and plenty of people to help you. I always remember they had meal call, and there was 2 different settings, early and late. And so, there was 5 of us traveled together. 3 of us went to Australia and 2 to New Zealand on the same program. And so, a bunch of us country kids, and so we'll early program, we get up and eat breakfast early, and on the way home we signed up for the late.
It's not the end of your travels. Like after you went to us, this is the first time you kind of traveled outside the country, right? Going to Australia was the first time you traveled outside the country, right?
Yeah.
But then you did some significant traveling after that, kind of throughout the rest of your life. You've done quite a bit of traveling. Why?
Well, first of all, when we came home from Australia, we because we had gotten halfway around the world at that time, there was a discount to go the rest of the way, and it cost me $39 to go the rest of the way.
So you got halfway around the world, and it cost you $39 to go the rest of the way around the world?
Yep.
Okay.
So we left Sydney, went around the south side of Australia through the Australian Bight, which is supposed to be the roughest ocean in the world. And I would believe it.
Did you get seasick?
No, I did not.
I'm jealous of that. I get seasick on the river, for goodness sake.
No, I didn't. But as an example, I stood on the gangway on the outside of the boat on the one side of it with a camera, and I held the camera still and took 2 pictures. And on one picture, you can't see any sky, and on the next picture, you can't see any water. But anyway, we came home around the world, went Ceylon, India, Egypt, went up through the Suez Canal, crawled up in the pyramids, and got to Nice, France, across the Mediterranean. And the boat went around, Gibraltar and to London, and that was what our destination was. But we got off the boat in Nice, France, and we traveled through Europe without an agenda and no money. And we traveled through Europe 11 days, and then met another boat to go back to New York.
So no money and no plan. How
Yep.
do you pull that off? And it was 5 of you together?
There was 5 of us. We had no plan, so we would get together. We would go to, there was a information station in the railroad depot always. We go there and we got some maps, and we decide, okay, tomorrow we're going to go this far, and we're going to either go on the train or a bus. And so then we go that far. And each one of us had some responsibility. One was the money person, and one was pick the spot, and one pick the transportation or arrange for it, and so on. And we went past Morocco on the day of the race. And boy, I wanted to stop at the race, but the girls wouldn't let us.
What race is that?
There's a Formula One race every year on a program at what's the name of that country? That Monaco is the town.
Monaco?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where Princess Grace married the guy.
Yeah.
Anyway, we went past it, and while other people were racing, we could actually see the car go by on the
That's
track.
cool.
And so then we go to the next place, and we go to the information bureau and ask for the cheapest hotel in town. And there was 2 girls and 3 guys, so the girls would stay in one room and we'd stay in the other. And we always got a clean, decent room. Never got a bad one. Then we got to, I was trouble with this one. We were in Milan. We got on one of the river boats on the Rhine River and went from Italy through. No, we went from Milan, Italy through Switzerland, and then got on the Rhine River boat and went to Cologne, Germany, and then finally to Belgium to get across the river. Get across the English Channel to get to England. And one night we were in Switzerland, and I said, I was handling the money. I said, we ought to kind of figure out how much money we have. So we all threw it, whatever money we had, we all threw it on the bed. Because every day we had created a pot, and the pot paid for everything. So we threw our money on the bed, and we had $72, and we were in Zurich, Switzerland. Our transportation on the boat was paid for. Our lodging in London was paid for, but the European trip was on the $72, or what was left of it. We made it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's such a good experience for, I think, just young people. I mean, obviously, it's a little harder to have those experiences.
You'd never do it again.
Right, yeah. But I think there's something to that also. Just learn to be resourceful. Not necessarily a trip like that, but just like being in situations where you got to figure it out, right? And having a little fun, being a little foolish, not. I've lost my camera. Well, there might just be 2 pictures of you for a while. I'm not sure what happened. My camera just disappeared. Well.
Like I said, you couldn't do it again because you'd be too wise to do it again.
I suppose.
But, things like one day in Milan, Italy, we went into a grocery store and bought a big chunk of bread and a bottle of wine and a chunk of cheese and sat in the park and ate lunch, stuff like that.
Yeah.
We didn't eat high off the hog or anything like that. And one night when we got to Milan, Italy, it was on the train, it was dark. It was pretty late at night. So we went to the travel bureau there and ask for the cheapest hotel in town. And over there, the hotel would come and get you from the station. So we were waited, and pretty soon here comes this little car. And we piled into this little car, and it was a 3-passenger car, and there were 5 of us in it. This guy's the driver, and the girls were sitting on our lap, and Lois leaned over and she said to me, now what did we get ourselves into? So here we go through Milan, Italy. No streetlights, just darker than dark. And we pull up in front of what looked like a warehouse. And up in one window in the second floor was a red sign that said hotel. So we went in there, and it was a family that ran the warehouse, and they had 2 rooms that they rented out. And perfect place. And in the morning, because it was late, we were, kind of slept in, and I could hear music. So I got up and pushed the curtains aside, and here was 2 guys, one guy playing an accordion and another guy singing on the sidewalk out in front.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's cool. That's cool.
And then we said to the lady that was running the place, where could we go for lunch? She said down to this little Italian restaurant down in the corner. It was a nowhere near anything touristy. It was just a local restaurant. They had the best soup I ever had in my life. I don't know what it was, but it was good. But that's what we did.
Yeah. And then you did quite a bit of traveling with Grandma too, over in Europe and things.
We have 2 couples that were friends of ours, people that I went to high school with, and lost track of when we all went to college, and then picked it up again after we got married. And so we traveled together. We rented a van and drove all the way from London to Scotland and Wales and back once, and went to Switzerland once, and so on. And we also had the opportunity, because we were, John Deere dealers. We were fortunate enough to meet the goals a few times and travel to Ireland and England and Mexico. And so, yeah, we were very fortunate to be able to see a lot of places.
What's the draw for you to travel?
Seeing how other people live. Seeing how other people live.
Yeah.
And I won't say that the beaches in Mexico weren't a nice thing either, but for example, in England, one of the fellas in this group of 3 couples was totally retired, and he had been an executive in the DNR. The other fellow was a executive at Snap-on in Kenosha. Anyway, the fellow that was totally retired, he did the figuring out the itinerary. And so in England and Scotland and Wales, we stayed in bed and breakfast. And to go into these different homes was just truly interesting. Truly interesting.
Yeah.
This story is going to make it sound like I drink a lot, but I don't. I don't really. But we were in Scotland one night, and it was a cold, miserable, rainy night, and we had gotten into this bed and breakfast kind of late, and had supper. And so the lady at the bed and breakfast told us that if we went down into the town, there was a little hotel there, and they would serve us a meal. And so we went in there and sat down at the table, and the waitress come up to us, and of course the first thing she asked us if we wanted something to drink. And then we all agreed, yeah, we were cold and wet. And she said, well, what would you like to drink? And so we kind of looked at each other, and I finally said, I think we ought to drink scotch, seeing as we're in Scotland. She said, well, what kind of scotch would you like? I said, I don't know, but you know. So she brought us, which must have been the top of the shelf. It was the smoothest. And of course, we were cold and miserable to start with, and it just went down like honey.
I'm sure.
And then we had, I don't remember what we had for a meal, but it's fun to order what's on the menu and you don't know what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. If there was a place, are there any places left on your list that you'd like to see?
Yeah, I'd like to go to South America.
South America?
I don't know where in South America, but
yeah.
I've never been in South America.
Okay. Mountains, beaches. What do you think? Big city, out in the country?
Out in the country, farms, out in the country, small towns. I don't know if there was a trip that visited missionaries or something like that, I would go.
Yeah.
I like the trips where you're being led. And I think it's because we've always been busy in our lives. And when we went on these trips, we like to be able to, I like the trips where the luggage shows up in your room and the tour is at 8:00 and so on.
Yeah.
And I like those kind, although that one that we did ourselves in England was kind of that way because Jim had laid it out so well for us. But that's what I would like.
Yeah, I mean that's a true vacation, right? That's why people like all-inclusive resorts. You write the check ahead of time, you show up, and you relax.
That's right. That's right.
All right. Well, we're just about out of time here, so thank you for being on. Then we'll have to do it again because we got plenty to talk about. So.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here, and I didn't know what we'd talk about when you asked me to do this, but sounds like we kind of filled up the time.
Absolutely, and then some. So wonderful.
It's
wonderful.
It's nice to have you in the family, and
you can't get rid of me. So,
well, I don't think we probably don't want to, but and I wish you well.
Thank you. If you enjoyed the podcast today, make sure you go click on the links down in the show notes below. Go ahead and make that $5 cup of coffee donation. No matter what, God bless you. Thanks for watching the show. And we'll see you again very, very soon. God bless you.